T20 Test on one day. India, England, Australia. The bowler, lucky, big three-side slayer. What a player! What a player! What a player! Discussing zinger bells and white balls to hells. Baggy greens for long from New South Wales. Is the RPL heaven or hell? Will the 100 fail or do quite well? What a player! What a player! What a player!
Hello and welcome back to Waadaplaya Concussion Sub-Series. 9th edition of Hero Caribbean Premier League will take place in St. Kitts and Nevis between 26th of August and 15th of September 2021. 33 T20 games will be played between 6 teams. There was a combined broadcast and digital viewership of over 500 million during the 2020 season to make it one of the most watched leagues in the world. Thanks to the pandemic as well, I'd imagine. Tournament will begin at the Warner Park from 26th with a match between defending champions Trinbago Knight Riders and Guyana Amazon Warriors. The Knight Riders will be eager to add a 5th title, or 4th rather, I think. This is the biggest party in sport, and we have 2 returning concussion subs and 1 debutant today to preview the tournament. Please welcome the evergreen, the mascot of CPL, Gautam Bhimani, co-founder of Carib Cricket, Machel, and his partner on the podcast, Santokie. Welcome, guys. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
Pleasure to be here as ever.
Thank you, guys. Looking forward to making my debut on Waadaplaya and talking about how Guyana Amazon Warriors are finally going to win CPL this year.
Excellent. We'll come to that. But before the most known face for us, Gautam Bhimani, from an India perspective, you've been associated with the CPL for a while. Tell us how that came about, and every year you're turning back. How do you see the tournament vis-a-vis some of the bigger boys, probably IPL, maybe even Big Bash League, maybe? How did that come about? And tell us a bit more about it.
Well, I think the biggest party in sport really sums it up. I mean, it's not just another tagline. There are a lot of brands, there are a lot of tournaments, events across sport that have taglines for the sake of having one. But I think the biggest party in sport truly symbolizes what CPL is, because the format, the T20 format, or even now the T10 format, is about enjoyment of the game. It's about marketing the game. It's about packaging the game for players, for organizers, for broadcasters, and of course for fans who mean the world to any sport. So once you have that in place, and you know that everybody out there is playing serious cricket while having a massive party in a part of the world where they're supremely knowledgeable about the game. And that's the one thing for anyone listening or watching who may not be into Caribbean cricket, is you might have someone starting on the liquid refreshments from 10 in the morning, but that does not prevent them from being supremely knowledgeable about the sport. They love the sport almost as much as it's a religion in India and in the subcontinent. So I think that is what gives it a unique flavor. Obviously, in terms of size, you can't compare it to the sheer might of an IPL, but the flavor is completely unique. No tournament in the world, not the Big Bash, not even the 100 that started afresh, can have it, purely because of its setting, the players, the local players, and the stadiums. I mean, now we are down to 1 stadium this year and last year as well, but it still captures the flavor of I think, the most unique limited overs tournament in the world.
And Gautam, just a follow-up point on that, in terms of uniqueness, does the fact that West Indies cricket as a whole is a combination of nations, does this bring country versus country sort of rivalry in the tournament as well, rather than like a domestic tournament?
I mean, you don't really feel it, to be honest, when you're here, because West Indian cricket is so unique. I mean, everything else, when they're in the Olympics, obviously competing as individual nations, but cricket's just been unique that way. It's been the West Indies. It's been the cry of rally round the West Indies, and it sort of brings all the countries together. I mean, they still probably have to have a visa stamp when they go from Jamaica to Barbados to Trinidad to Guyana to St. Kitts, but it doesn't really matter. You don't notice it. You feel one as a nation, and that's I think what brings it all together. And it's the reason we always say in this part of the world that T20 cricket was probably invented for the West Indian way of life and the West Indian way of cricket. And it's not a coincidence that the West Indies have won the T20 World Cup twice, and they'll be favourites again come Dubai.
Yeah, the reigning champions. Coming to Machel and Santoke, tell us a bit more about Carib cricket and your involvement and association with CPL. I know you guys are probably doing some podcasts this year as well for them.
Yeah, so we've kind of hooked up with CPL since what are we going to say, like February, March, and yeah, I mean the Caribbean Cricket Podcast, which was an entity in and of itself, effectively we've linked it to CPL as well, and we've been fortunate in that the episodes which have been linked to CPL have featured a number of key stakeholders within West Indies cricket, both off the field and on the field, and I guess more importantly as well, a number of the key players that you would expect to see shine in CPL this year, and then hopefully later on by the time the World Cup comes around. But then I guess in terms of the Caribbean Cricket Podcast itself, whenever CPL comes around, Santokie and I stop talking to each other because our specific Jamaica and Guyana loyalties suggest that we can no longer be friends for the duration of the tournament.
Yeah, just to echo, if viewers here can see, Machel's not flying the West Indies flag behind him. He's got the Jamaica one because it's every man for himself when CPL starts. But yeah, just to follow on what Machel said, the Caribbean Cricket Podcast, we sort of started it because me and Machel talked a lot about West Indian cricket, and we realised there wasn't really an outlet to kind of provide news outside of the Caribbean as to what's going on with players. And there's always drama in West Indies cricket, administration or on the field. So we just started the Caribbean Cricket Podcast as an outlet for that. And yeah, it's just gained popularity there, and we've taken it forward by having a partnership with CPL this year.
That's awesome. Great. Jumping into the tournament in itself, I think there are 6 teams, and are the defending champions the favorites this year too, or do the other 5 teams have any chance? I know, Santokie, you have an opinion about Guyana, but who should we look for this year?
Yeah, I think 100% it'd be logical to say Trinbago are definitely favourites. They're probably the strongest T20 side, other than Mumbai Indians, probably the strongest T20 side in the world. If you look at their makeup, they've sort of got their bowling, all-rounders and batting is a perfect complement to each other. I think under the captainship of Kyron Pollard, they're a very strong unit. They've got strong West Indian experienced batters, Lendl Simmons, Darren Bravo. Then you've got the likes of Sunil Narayan as well. So all round, you can't really see many flaws in Trinbago. They've obviously lost DJ Bravo this year, which could have an effect. But to make up for that, they've got Jaden Seals as well, who's emerged in the Test arena. It'll be interesting to see how he comes into T20 cricket. But I would say Trinbago are massively strong favourites. The only difference is this year they don't have the home advantage, which they had last year. So that could play a part. But obviously, me being Guyanese, I have to say I think Guyana will be a threat with the likes of Hetmeyer and Pooran. But if you're looking at actual squads, you can't really look past Trinbago, in my opinion.
Okay. And for Guyana in itself, I think captaincy of Nicholas Pooran, will that come in handy, especially with the 5-match experience he had with Australia? Do you think that'll help? And he is also on and off form. Will he play a factor for Guyana?
Yeah, 100%. I think in the West Indies setup, they're grooming Nicholas Pooran to be a long-term captain in the white ball squads. And last year in the CPL, he was the only player who scored a century. So he's someone who can stand up when it counts. He's got captain experience, as you said, against Australia, and he'll be key in the squad. But he's also complemented this season. We've brought back Shoaib Malik and Mohamed Hafiz, who have played before for Guyana, so they know the team very well, and they've obviously got vast amounts of experiences coming towards the end of their career. So he'll be supported as well by those players. The only criticism you could say for Guyana is they've sort of stuck to the same formula. There's not much variation in their team. They've kept it consistent, but you feel having lost 5 previous finals, they haven't brought in as much, what can I say, as much freshness as you'd like to see for them to kind of cross that line and win the title. So whilst they've remained consistent, you could say, have they not changed enough to win this season.
And March for Jamaica, Andre Russell, Ray Russ. I think he's warming up for the World Cup. And you have Shakib Al Hasan, Carlos Brathwaite, Chris Gale. I think pretty good on paper. So what are the chances this year?
Well, unfortunately, we don't have Gale. So Gale's at St. Kitts. And Shakib was a late pullout. I think Bangladesh must have a series, so he's a pullout. And to be honest, the only thing that is making me pull for Jamaica at this stage is my national loyalty. Because if I wasn't going to be biased, I'd actually argue that on paper Jamaica have got the weakest team in the tournament. If I'm going to take all national bias out of it, as much as I've teased Santokie and said Guyana will come last, I actually think Jamaica might come last. So it will take, if Jamaica were to win the tournament this year, it would take Dre Russ doing Dre Russ things and dragging that team above and beyond, because it's not the strongest team on paper. And I think as Santokie alluded to, you have to look at TKR. But what I would say, and I'm sure Gautam will have an opinion on this, as compared to last year's CPL, so the other four teams, speaking about Ghana, so St. Kitts, St. Lucia, Barbados, when I looked at last year's CPL, it was obvious Trinbago were going to win. Or certainly it was to myself and Santokie, and that it would take something special to stop them. Whereas this year, when I look at the other sides, I think the gap's a bit smaller. Apart from Jamaica, where I think the gap is just as huge as it was last year. So I don't think you should be looking to Jamaica to be the team to challenge Trinbago, but certainly in amongst Guyana, St. Kitts, St. Lucia and Barbados, I see enough all-round composition within their squads whereby they could cause a shock if it came down to a knockout scenario. But I don't know where Gautam stands on that.
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, I was corrected by both Machel and Santokie about the feel of United West Indian cricket versus the individual rivalries. So, I guess when you get into it, the fans are looking at their flags, they're looking at their countries. But then again, you've got situations like Chris Gale, an out-and-out Jamaican, now gone back to play for the Patriots, where he was a few years ago, and pretty impactful. That combination of Gale and Evan Lewis, and I think the pullouts have had a bit of an effect. I agree wholeheartedly with Machel that Jamaica look good. They'll always have the swagger. They'll have the brightest uniform. They'll have Dre Russ, but they just don't have that depth. You can't have Russell pulling out every time. It's like for KKR in the IPL. They've started to rely a bit on Russell's big knocks, but they don't have that depth all around from top to bottom. Whereas someone like St. Kitts, they had Anrik Nokia, he's had to pull out, unfortunately. They had Wanindo Hasaranga, who I thought would be a match winner this tournament. He's a late pullout, and obviously they've lost Razi van der Dusen. But they've got decent replacements. I flew in with Paul van Meekeren, who's a very energetic cricketer, fast bowler out of the Netherlands. He's the replacement there. Asif Ali comes in for the Patriots, as does Fawad Ahmed, who a good leggy is always a good value. So I think watch out for the Patriots, because if Gale and Lewis fire up front, they've got a decent middle order, and with Cottrell picking up wickets up front, I think they'll be a handful as well. The Kings, you've got to remember the new name, St. Lucia Kings, Barbados Royals. We've got to get used to that. People still call them the Zooks and the Tridents. We've got to get used to that. And the IPL influence on the CPL. So I think the Kings have had too many changes. Just like Machel talked about Jamaica being maybe a little weak on paper. The problem with St. Lucia is every year they seem to have a new look side. And only when they settle down will they be able to have matches. They still have good players. They still have Rakeem Cornwall who can make an impact. The Spiceman, always there and thereabouts. But really, if you had to challenge TKR, I would say Barbados and St. Kitts are the ones who are going to do it along with Guyana. You know Guyana are going to be there. They just need to figure out how we're going to win that extra game. I still think, I agree with Santokie, they maybe need to do something different, but maybe not something too different. They just need maybe one X-factor player to come in and say that, okay, the team is taking us through to the final. Who's going to be that one explosion in a final?
So every year a tournament is big enough, but if I was to assume that a lot of these players domestically, their aspiration would be, let's say, play in an IPL, get a big contract, life-changing money and all that. It's a big year for auction coming up. It's perfect ground for auditioning. If you were to probably look at a few upcoming players, and with 2 additional teams in the IPL, there'll be more opportunities potentially as well. Throw us some names which we can potentially look out for, because West Indies cricketers are so impactful and so popular in India. Like even in 2016 when India lost the World Cup, after India, all the Indians were supporting West Indies because they're such popular IPL commodities.
I mean, if I jump in first and I'll see where Gautam and Santokie, what they think about this. And I'm linking this to the fact that there's more IPL owners as well. So this makes it even more likely that you'll start to see a bit of a feeder system. Like we have to see it as we've got to call it as we see it. Like IPL owners would love nothing more than to be able to spot a talent before another franchise gets there. So I look at St. Lucia, and I will be shocked if somebody isn't going after Obed McCoy. If he is a good CPL following up from his summer exploits with the West Indies, I expect to see him, if not in the rest of IPL this year, certainly next year, because the variations he offers, that's elite at the franchise level. I don't know if IPL's too big a step, but he's going to be on franchises. Other tournament franchises will be looking at him. And similarly, keeping with the IPL link, I would go across to Barbados, and I'm looking at someone like Kyle Mayers. Now, Kyle Mayers told myself and Santokie on the last podcast episode that he had actually got a deal with Rajasthan, and then the pandemic IPL was suspended. So I don't know, and he didn't let us know. I don't know if that deal still extends when IPL returns. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. But clearly, the fact that Rajasthan had a deal on the table for Kyle Mayers already tells you that IPL are looking at West Indian talent outside of the Chris Gales, the Bravos, the etc. It's all about who are the next set of West Indians coming through.
I mentioned him earlier, but I think all eyes will be on Jayden Seales naturally. I think just the promise he showed and how good he was in the Test series so far that we've seen him, it means even if he doesn't need to have an exceptional tournament, in my opinion, even if he has a good tournament, I think IPL franchises will take the risk on him, just because he's one of the very few bowlers. As soon as you bowl him, as soon as you see him bowl 1 over, you know he's a world-class talent. Just the way he bowls, his movement, just everything about him. He just has an aura of a future star. So I think IPL franchises will be watching him and they'll want to get him first. So as long as he puts in a good performance, a steady performance for Trimbago, I think we'll see him link up with an IPL franchise sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I think the key is Machel hit the nail on the head. It's, a few years ago, you would have said, okay, West Indian cricket means we want the flamboyance of a Chris Gale. We want a DJ Bravo with his dance moves and all that. But they've realized in India that you need solid young players as well. It's great for a franchise to have Chris Gale, who brings much more off the field than he does on the field at times. But it's these X-factor players who are going to be so important. I'd probably also even look at a Mark Dayal if he can sneak in a performance there. Hayden Walsh Jr., fabulous. The only problem with a leg spinner nowadays is there's too many of them already there in every franchise. And I was talking to some guys in the IPL franchises casually off the field and asking them, I said, why not a Hayden Walsh? Why not a Hasaranga? And now Hasaranga's, of course, got in as a replacement. But they said, listen, it's not about how good a player is. It's about what slots we need to fill. So no matter how good a Hayden Walsh might be, if there is not a demand for a leg spinner in any of the IPL franchises, unfortunately, he'll have to wait. So they have to look at what? Maybe a good fast bowling all-rounder is always an asset. Jason Holder tends to be underrated, but every time he walks into that franchise and he somehow fits his way into playing in the 11, you see what an impact he has. So you'd always want a Jason Holder in your side. He's got that leadership quality, bats, bowls. So I think it's about filling the right slots. But otherwise, I'd like to see some of the younger players coming through and filling those slots in the IPL.
Okay. And what about that? That's great insights on West Indies. What about the internationals this year? Shoaib Malik, of course, greatest of all time T20 player. But who are some to look out for, considering some of the backouts this year?
I think Barbados made a very good signing, getting Glenn Phillips in, probably the most successful overseas batsman in CPL history. So he's a massive loss for Jamaica, but also he shores up Barbados' batting strength. And St. Lucia as well, Faf du Plessis coming in, arguably the best signing in the draft, in my opinion. He's someone who, I know he's had concussion issues, so it'll be interesting to see if he does manage to play in the CPL. But if he does, he's someone who not only provides the quality, we've seen him with Chennai Super Kings, but also the leadership attributes, which the team will be lacking because Darren Sammy's no longer in the side. So he kind of fills both of those voids. And so I think those two, from an overseas perspective, are massive signings for each franchise.
Yeah, I can't look too far past them. It'll be interesting to see how Yasser Shah gets on. He doesn't really play T20s, and he may not necessarily even get in the Trinbago team because their options bowling wise are so vast that there's no guarantee that Yasser even plays necessarily a lot of games, I should say. But it'll be interesting to see how he gets on. And actually, as much as I said Jamaica's team is weak, I do think Chris Green is a solid, much like Santokie said for Glenn Phillips, kind of being one of the overseas players that you kind of associate with CPL. Chris Green's like that as well. You know what you get with Chris Green. It's very rare that he has a bad game. He's a 7 out of 10 player no matter what. So actually, I kind of liked the fact that Jamaica took Green from Guyana, and I'm fairly certain, Santokie, that if you could, you'd have wanted Chris Green to hang around. Yeah,
definitely. He's a solid hand that you'd like to have in your franchise. One name I did miss out as well, Tim David as well for St. Lucia. He's shown his ability, fast rising in the T20 circuit, the Singaporean. Ability against pace as well is excellent. So I think he'll be a great signing for the St. Lucia.
And it's not a coincidence that the names you guys have just mentioned have also sneaked into the IPL simultaneously. So there's Tim David, Glenn Phillips, both of whom have got into IPL franchises, obviously for different reasons. Players have had to pull out, some are not available. Josh Butler's not available for Rajasthan. So in comes Glenn Phillips as an able replacement. I think he should walk into every T20 franchise tournament in the world. He just brings that energy. Every time he walks onto the field, you know, he can get you 100, he can keep wickets. Even if you don't give him the gloves, he'll field in the outfield. He's got a strong throw from the deep. So he's a great guy to have around the dressing room. So I think those are the factors that teams look at as well. But I also agree about Yasser Shah. I'd love to see, because they've had Fawad recently, Trinbago. They had the ageless Indian Praveen Tambe last year, who came and played. He was good value, but again, he didn't play every single game. So interesting how they go about using that leg spinner role in TKR.
And one common question, which is, will BCCI players ever get a green light to play in BBL and CPL? Because I think that will change the dynamic of these franchisee tournaments overseas.
Gautam, you deal with that.
It's a no-brainer. I mean, I honestly think that there's a method behind their madness. I'm not necessarily batting for them on this. I fully agree that players should be allowed to play. It's ply their trade around the world. It's a profession after all. But I see where they're coming from, and wanting to protect certain big players, I won't necessarily argue with that. But what they should honestly turn around and do, saying, okay, Virat Kohli, Rohit Sharma, maybe list out 10 players. These are going to be our centrally contracted A-listers who we won't part with for now. But everybody else should get a go. Everybody else. There are some players in India who are not even getting into an IPL franchise, and they get into trouble if they go and sign up for some other league. I honestly feel that shouldn't happen. But I see where the ethos of where they're coming from in terms of protecting their players. So I think if stage 1 were to happen, India has such a huge pool of talent, you'd still already have enough players coming in there who don't have to retire before they come and play this league, like Tambe did, like Yuvraj did, like some others, Irfan Pathan did.
Okay, it's an interesting point. And then I was also looking at crowds. So is it going to be 100% capacity in the grounds, or what's the direction on crowd capacity?
So it's set to be 50% capacity.
Okay.
And you have to be fully vaccinated. So similar to with the West Indies summer, where apart from when we got to obviously Jamaica right now, where and Barbados in fact, but across the other islands, 50% capacity. and you have to be fully vaccinated. But what CPL have said is the weekday games, which start at 10 o'clock in St. Kitts, will also be behind closed doors. But that's not because there's any greater risk. That's more because in the Caribbean, cricket isn't really seen as an CPL. And let's go back to the tagline, biggest party in sport. People turn up to have a party. So it'll be the later games where you'll see people actually want to turn up and, as Gautam referred to earlier on, have a drink and enjoy the cricket. And that's not something in the Caribbean that we really associate with an early start. It's got to be afternoon into the evening for that. So CPL have made the decision to basically play those weekday games at 10 o'clock behind closed doors.
Yeah, and the prices of the ticket comparing to Lord's Day One versus CPL, I fell off my chair. I mean, I'd love to fly and watch the games with that cost of prices. What I've seen, it's like $40. That's amazing. And compared to Lord's Day One, it was 150 quid, at least a minimum start. So hopefully crowds leverage that. So Gautam, from a commentary panel, do we have Danny Morrison coming back into the mix? Who do we have on the commentary mix?
Danny's never left. Danny's never left. There's only a rumor that he goes back to Sydney. When the CPL finishes, he sneaks into some corner of the island. He stays there for the rest of the year, and he pops up again when the next CPL begins. So Danny Morrison is a permanent fixture here. The only new face we have this year, because Tom Moody, who's also part of the CPL governing council and an integral part of CPL, he's involved with the team at the 100, and I don't think he was able to make it this time. So Simon Dool comes in, flown in also from the 100. So Dooley joins Morrison as part of the international panel. And then, of course, we've got the usual suspects in Bish, Ganga and Badri, all of whom are in the reign of Jamaica at the moment. They're going to finish the test match, fly in on the 25th and come straight into commentary. And there's Alex Jordan as well, who adds a different kind of spark to the commentary box now.
Beautiful. Excellent. Looking forward to it. Lots of cricket coming up. And I think that's a nice segue, Sanjay, for the T20 build-up World Cup.
Yes, obviously a big year for all the players, not just for the fact that we have an upcoming big IPL auction with additional teams, but the World T20. So West Indies' chances, everyone thinks they are the favourites, considering how some of the bigger teams are falling off the cliff. How good a chance they have, and what are your general predictions about the World T20? Who are the 4 teams potentially you see making to the semis? Let's start with Gautam, maybe.
Well, at the moment, I can't even look beyond 3 teams, to be honest. India, England, and the West Indies. Not necessarily in that order. I would still put the West Indies as favourites. India have such a good nucleus of players in all 3 formats. That's what stands them in good stead. England have obviously forgotten how to play Test match cricket, so one day they'll rediscover that. But I think it came at the cost of their white ball cricket, because they put such a concerted effort into it. And I was chatting with Owen Morgan for a book interview the other day, and he actually put it in perspective. He said after the debacle of 2015, when they lost really badly, they sat and said, what can we do differently? And the first series they played against New Zealand in England, it was a 5-match series. I think they ended up winning 3-2. But the fact was they were scoring 400, 380, 375. And Morgan said it was a new attitude. He said, even if we lose a game, we're going to go out there and give our all. Even if we get bowled out in the 43rd over, we'll get bowled out in the 43rd over for 360. That is, of course, 50 over cricket. Now, that's percolated down to the T20 version. They did win, of course, in 2010 in the Caribbean. So I think England and the white ball team will always be up there. West Indies favourites, India very close behind, or if not joint favourites. I have no idea what's happened to Australia, but I can't look beyond these 3 teams for the moment.
Give us a 4th team, Gautam, to make up the semis. Pakistan, a lot of people think are the underdogs, considering it's in UAE.
Well, honestly, given the group, I wouldn't put it beyond Pakistan. I mean, it's set up perfectly for an India-Pakistan final if the West Indies allow it to happen, because it's a very lopsided group where you have India, Pakistan, with all due respect, Afghanistan, and New Zealand in one side, and you've got England, South Africa, West Indies, and Australia. Even though the way Australia are playing right now, those are 4 heavyweights. All those matches are going to be competitive. Whereas here you've got one match to look forward to, India-Pakistan. And I presume Pakistan will somehow manage to come second in that group. If they have a good semi-final, I would then have to put them as my fourth team. Yeah.
Sure.
I'll be interested to see what Santokie says when I say this, but to be honest, when I saw the World Cup groups, the thing I was most happy about was that we avoided all of the spin. From whether that be India, Pakistan, Afghanistan. As soon as I saw all those teams on the other side of the draw, I was happy, because that's always been my fear, that we'd be put in a group where we'd get, everyone knows that's the West Indies' weakness by choking them out with spin. That said, both myself and Santokie have always said that what West Indies' strength is also their weakness, and ultimately, 5 years after the last World Cup, there's still no other team, and I still wouldn't even say England, there's still no other team that can out six the West Indies when push comes to shove. Now, sometimes that doesn't work in West Indies' favour, but I think when you're in a clutch moment and you look at all the teams and you're like, right, there's an improbable target that needs to be chased here, West Indies still are the only team where you'd think, yeah, they might be able to actually, even if they can't, they're still the only team where you'd look at them and go, they have the capacity to chase that down because of how many six hitters that they've got. But like I say, that's also our weakness. In terms of the teams, though, I think our group suits us in terms of getting through to the semi-final. The worry I've then got is if we then get to the semi-final and then we face a team who can literally hit us with spin for the first time properly in the tournament, we could then come unstuck. So my four for the semis: West Indies, England, India. I'm going to be controversial. Afghanistan.
Love it. They are my wild
I'm
card.
going to say by four.
Yeah, I love it. They are my wild card for the tournament, but let's see what happens.
Yeah, and I would say, West Indies for me favourites. If you look at their batting lineup: Simmons, Lewis, Gale, Hetmeyer, Pooran, Russell, Allen, DJ, Bravo. Not many teams have that amount. Well, no other team has that batting firepower where any in that top 8 has the potential to score a quick 50, 100 if needs be. The only concern would be the bowling. Obviously, Michelle's mentioned Obed McCoy. He's going to be crucial. The spin department, a lot is going to depend on if Sunil Narine comes back into the fold. He's obviously, we know what a world-class talent he is on the UAE pitches. He's going to be very, very important. But Hayden Walsh Jr. has stepped up in the series against Australia. So he's someone who can come in, and we obviously have Fabian Allen. I think a crucial point about West Indies, similar to Pakistan, which is why I think Pakistan will make the semi-finals, is West Indies are a side who step their game up when it matters in tournaments. So they can play all the bilateral series in the world. They can lose them all. When it comes to a tournament and there's something on the line, you'll see them step up. So for all the talk about Chris Gale playing at number 3 and not being suited for it, you can bet when the World Cup comes, he'll hit big scores, because it's a tournament and it matters. So I think West Indies and Pakistan will make the semi-final. And as Gautam and Michelle said, you can't look really beyond England and India as well.
Yeah, just a bench.
Honestly, I'm going to just jump in here to agree with Michelle. I don't think it was a controversial choice of Afghanistan. I think it was spot on because they've got the talent. I just hope everything that's happened around the world will inspire them rather than get to them, and I think it will. They're that kind of people. They're resilient, and it's a wonderful story how they got this far. And I think if they can make it into the semis, it'll be great for them as a nation overall. And that one game, Pakistan versus Afghanistan, I think will be a cracker in that group to decide who can join India. I mean, I'm all due respect to New Zealand, I just somehow don't see them as a force in this format at the moment.
Fascinating.
It'd be a wonderful story. The West Indies just the bench strength. I remember in the last World Cup, Lentil Simmons just flying into the semi-final and smashing those runs. India will not want to face West Indies, at least in the semi-finals. In the finals we can see who wins. Sorry, Subhash.
No, I was going to ask for wrapping on CPL. So quick, last top two for the table. Who would be this year? Starting with Gautam.
As I said, I mean, they're the Mumbai Indians of the CPL or TKR. I've got a lot of friends in the franchise who work for the franchise, who play in the franchise, and yet every time you come to them and say, guys, look, give somebody a chance kind of thing. But they don't do that. They're not like that. So it's got to be TKR +1, whichever way you look at it. And for that +1, I think it's going to be a cliffhanger between the Patriots and the Warriors.
Okay. Marsh?
Yeah, obviously TKR. TKR. Do you know the pitches in St. Kitts are going to be batting friendly, but it'll be interesting to see. Certainly up front, up top, we're going to see some big scores. I would expect to see some big scores because Warner Park. That's generally speaking what happens. How it then plays after about 20 odd matches have been played is another question altogether. If the pitches start to take spin, then I'll look at Guyana and consider them. If it doesn't, then actually I might look at St. Lucia again, but not because I think their team is the best team in the tournament or anything like that, but actually one thing that St. Lucia do have, and Andre Fletcher said this to us, and I do think it's worth noting, that Andy Flower he got St. Lucia to actually play well last year, and St. Lucia are usually the joke team in the tournament, and it shouldn't be overlooked that St. Lucia got to the final last year, which was a big surprise. So, and I've got to put that down to Andy Flower being the new coach. So, something about me says look at St. Lucia. I could be wrong, but I'm gonna say TKR and St. Lucia. But if it's spin, Guyana.
Okay.
Well, if you had said that loud enough, Machel, literally 15 feet away from me, the St. Lucia team are in the pool having a session, and so they'll be happy with that. Led by Kesrick Williams, always the energy man in that team.
Yeah.
And yeah, on my part, every year since 2013, I've been confidently declaring Guyana will win the CPL. So logic would say this year not to go for that. But a good thing about being Guyanese is we tend not to listen to logic a lot of times. So I'm going to declare Guyana Amazon Warriors to win CPL this year in a final against Trinbago, with Nicholas Pooran hitting the winning runs against his Trinidadian compatriots.
Okay, very thorough, very thoughtful. Excellent. On that note, listen, Gautam, Mach, and Santokie, thanks very much for taking time on a Sunday evening. Really, really appreciate it. Sanjay, thanks for the questions. Beautiful session. And hopefully we enjoy the biggest party on the planet coming soon. And folks who are watching, drop us a comment. Tell us your feedback about what did you like about this show. And Mach, Gautam, and Santokie, thanks again. Really appreciate you making time for us.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Always a pleasure.
Excellent. Thanks for watching, guys. Take care. Bye.